Because as you heard, today is the 20th of Av, Rebbe's father's birthday. Yard side anniversary passing. It also so happens that he's my namesake, named after him. And the Rebbe definitely asked and requested and thanked people who learned something of his father's teachings on those yard sites. So I'll share something that Rabbi Levi said, Avar to Rabbi Levi, on related to Yom Kippur. I tried finding something connected directly to our Gemoro, but there are commentaries that come on the Gemoro later when it comes to Tshuva, and commentary earlier when the Gemara talks about the high priest in the temple, but nothing on our section dealing with the laws of not eating. But this is just a generalistic vart related from Yom Kippur, from the Rebbe Levi on Yom Kippur. As you heard, his writings, or the ones we have at least, are written on the margins of his books. We had occasion once to talk about it, about his style of learning and his whole history, how he learned. And he used to write on the margins of the books using ink that his wife made out of berries and grass that they would find out there in Kazakhstan. That was all that was available. Only ink that's available and only paper that's available was the margins. And something which I hadn't considered before, which is he only had a few books. 2 volumes of the Zohar, a Tanya. We know he had 2 Midrashim also. But he didn't have a lot of books unless the communists who sent him deemed it appropriate, which means all the citations that he has on his margins, which there are literally hundreds, are all from memory. It's not like he looked up in the library to see where it is and then he wrote down the source. It's all from memory, which is quite remarkable in and of itself. Just a little anecdote, interesting thing that I discovered recently is when Rebbe's mother, so Rebbe Levi Yitzchak's wife, Rebbe Chana, so she went with him to exile. She actually went after he had already gone, and she found out where he was, and she traveled there to be with him. And that's where she made the berries for him to write, made the ink out of berries for him to write. So after he passed away, he basically died from all the years of abuse that the communists did to him, malnutrition, and he wouldn't eat not kosher food, and they'd give him some water, and instead of drinking it, he would wash Negelwasser and wash his hands. And he ended up dying basically from that. And that's the fact that they literally beat him. And anyway, so he wasn't able, even though he was free, he could have left, in theory, he could have left Russia like many other Hasidim did a couple of years later, but he didn't make it, which is why he stayed a few kilometers away from his exile. That's where he stayed after he passed. He went to a small Jewish community in Almaty, in a small little village nearby. Anyway, so she did survive, and she brought those books with her. But she didn't bring the books all the way to America, which is what I thought. I just discovered yesterday, that she brought them to I knew she brought them to Moscow, but I didn't know she brought them to Moscow. When she came to Moscow, she was worried about holding them, because if the communists find them, it's gone. The books with her husband's commentary on the margins. So she distributed them to different people in Moscow she trusted, and said, you hold 1 book, you hide 2 books. And then those books came later, and every once in a while they would discover new ones. So I had recently found out that my great-great-uncle, which is a cousin of hers, my great-grandfather and his siblings are cousins with Rebbe's mother. So my great-great-uncle was living in Moscow at the time, had been seeing Kluvgant, and she gave him 2 volumes of the Medrash with his commentaries on the side. But he had passed away in Russia, and he didn't ever make it out to bring those books with him. And the Rebbe had learned about this, and the Rebbe had sent letters and met with my great uncle, which would be Chaim Ben Sin's nephew. Right? This person in Moscow is my great uncle, so my great uncle is his nephew, and been in contact with my great uncle to see if he can find out if he can find those books in Moscow. Then was my great uncle traveled there and tried to find out what happened. So he had a whole library in his apartment, and then it was donated. It was taken to a shul nearby when he died, and then the shul was burnt down. And whether they hid the books or didn't hide the books, we don't really know what happened. If you want, you can go through every single shul in Moscow, which there were hundreds. Go through all of their geniza, go through all of their buried manuscripts, and find the 2 volumes of Medrash amongst thousands of books with the margins. If you can find it, it would be quite something. I'm just telling you, there were more that we don't have, but anyway, as the rabbi mentioned, there's 5 books that we do have. my ancestry, I can go farther back. I can go quite far back. Primarily because as I get to a certain point, it's a lineage of Rabbanim. So Rabbanim usually have more of a historical footprint in terms of documentation. And I imagine many people in Russia can do that. The Russians are very meticulous on generally speaking, keeping record of everything. Who is who related to who talked to who went to who. They were very, very meticulous like that. Where do you live?
He lived in Russia.
How long ago?
He came here.
Do you know which city in Russia he came from? So if you knew, you'd not be able to find out. Anyway. Okay, so here's a little word from Rabbi Levi on Yom Kippur. So Yom Kippur is connected to the Bris Milah. The Pasuk says, and with this, with this, Aaron goes into the holy, and the high priest goes into the Holy of Holy, describing Yom Kippur, the whole service, which we did not learn that part of the Gemoro, but it's the first, 7 chapters of Gemoro and Yoma. So the Gemara says, the Medrash says in Vayikra Rabbah, that when it says he walked into the Holy of Holies with this, it's a reference to the Bris Milah. That the merit of the Bris Milah is what accompanied him walking into the Holy of Holies, which then means that Yom Kippur is related to the Bris Milah. What do we say on Yom Kippur? What do we say at the Bris Milah? We wish that the child should grow up to Torah, to chuppah, to marriage, and ma'asim tovim, to good deeds. And all these 3 things are related to Yom Kippur. How so? First of all, Yom Kippur is Matan Torah. You're thinking Matan Torah is on Shavuos, which is true. But the second set of tablets were on Yom Kippur. So the Torah that we actually learn is from Yom Kippur. So Torah, Yom Kippur right away is connected to Torah. Yom Kippur is connected to chuppah for 2 things. Number 1, it says that the cloud of the Torah is the cloud of the incense that were brought into the Holy of Holies covered the whole area, right? Would cover like a canopy, like a chuppah. And secondly, Yom Kippur is one of the days the Gemoro says is for shidduchim. The Gemoro says that Tu B'Av, which we just passed, and Yom Kippur were 2 greatest holidays. This is the end of the Gemara in Tainus, which says that those are the 2 days that women would go to the fields, the girls of Yerushalayim would go to the fields, and they would make shidduchim. As my father always says, why making shidduchim on Yom Kippur? Teaches you about marriage. Marriage is about the soul. You don't go looking for a shidduch on lustful days. You go looking for a shidduch on a soulful day. Teaches you something about marriage. And marriage is founded on Yom Kippur, not founded on... Anyway, so that's how Yom Kippur is related to chuppah. Torah, chuppah, and the last one, ma'asim tovim, good deeds. Yom Kippur, first of all, says 2 things. Number 1, after Yom Kippur, there's I think it's a medrash which says, or actually it's early in the Gemara maybe. Okay, it's a Tosfos and the Gemara later, quoting a medrash which says that after Yom Kippur is over, a heavenly voice comes out and says, it's a pasuk in Koheles which says, oh no, I'm mixing up, sorry. That's a pasuk which says, like the heavenly voice comes out and said, go eat your food. Go eat with joy. But there's another heavenly voice which comes out and says that all of your actions have been accepted. At the end of Yom Kippur, Hashem says, I accepted your actions, masecha. So it's already good deeds. Moreover, considering, as we're going to learn soon, Yom Kippur, on its highest level of teshuvah, is such that it turns your zdonis, your intentional sins, into zachis, into merits, so there are no more bad deeds. The moment Yom Kippur is over, there's no bad deeds that exist in your life. Even your bad deeds have been transformed into good. So that's the 3rd element you see at the Bris, and good deeds. Torah, marriage, and good deeds all related to Yom Kippur, as the high priest would walk into the Holy of Holies with the merit of the Bris, on which we bless the child with 3 things related to Yom Kippur. A word from Rabbi Levi.
I'm just reading in the Tayan book that if a child is not circumcised,
yeah,
he's in big trouble.
Yeah.
Shouldn't it be the parents that are in big trouble?
So the parents have their own reckoning. If
What is the child?
parents have their own reckoning if, God forbid, they didn't have a chance to, or they didn't circumcise their children. But nonetheless, at a certain age, the child is responsible to give himself a bris as well. At a certain age. And there are those who do it at 13 years old. Yeah. I mean, actually, right now, just recently, I was told of a 73-year-old man who wants to make a bris here in Montreal. Happens, 73 years old. He's ready to go through with a bris. It's almost like a Avraham Avinu at 99. When you were counseling Ukraine, young boys whose parents didn't give them a bris and they didn't make a bris. It's an amazing thing. Yeah. That's called MEASSURES nefesh. It's called self-sacrifice for serving Hashem. An adult decides to make a bris. Even the Medrash says about there's been some aspect, the virtue of Yishmael's bris is that he did it at 13 years old. As opposed to Yitzchak, who was 8 days old and didn't know what was happening. But it's a thing. You didn't do it.
So why did they say in the Torah that Moses was going to Egypt and forgot to...
He hadn't circumcised.
God almost killed him.
For not having circumcised.
Yeah.
Because he should have.
But here it says child is
Moshe didn't do himself and his children. No. No, he was born, but he had to do it, right? No, his first children. Sorry, his first children. He didn't do it for his children, right? He didn't do it for his, no, well, he was put into the river before I probably had a chance. Right? But it was 3 months old, that's right, so he probably did it already. Then his first children, his two sons weren't circumcised, he had to do it for them. When he was traveling on the way back to, yeah. Okay. Sorry? Yeah, the punishment applies, but the child's only responsible when it's 13. Before 13, it's the parents' responsibility. If there are no parents, it's the local Beth Din who's responsible. No, the parents have their own, Hashem has to deal with them in his own way. Right, as he grows older, he becomes responsible. Yeah. But even then, if the child passes away at that age, it's not, God forbid, an indictment to the child, it's an indictment to the parents. Once the child becomes older and becomes responsible for his own life, then the responsibility shifts from parents to child. Okay, let's learn a little Gemara before we go. So we concluded the Gemara's discussion on the size of culpability for eating on Yom Kippur, and now we get to the size of, or the volume of drinking liquid on Yom Kippur morning, the volume of liquid on Yom Kippur for culpability. How much do one have to drink on Yom Kippur to be liable? And then when we got to the conclusion of this halacha, we're going to learn the tractate of the chapter in Shulchan Aruch, which discusses this issue before we get to the issue of children eating on Yom Kippur and the issue of sick people eating and drinking on Yom Kippur. There's one section that discusses the amounts, and we'll get to that when we conclude this section of the Gemara. So the Gemara reads like this. Our Mishnah said, one who eats a cheekful. That's literally what it is, cheekful. We're going to see precisely what that means in a moment. Okay, so Amar Shmuel, said in the name of Shmuel, it doesn't mean literally a cheekful, mamish, because a cheekful would mean actually to fill your entire mouth, which would mean both cheeks, if you were to take it literally. And if Rebbe said in the name of Shmuel, it doesn't mean literally filling up your entire cheek, which is both sides. But Ella, it's the amount of water that if you were to push the water to one side, the yirik kamal logov, and it would look like, if you're looking at this side, it would look like my mouth is full, then you've already reached the amount of culpability, which is basically half of your mouth. Right? If you put water in your mouth, and you have enough water to push it to one side of the cheek, and if you're looking at me at my profile, you would see my cheek bulging, so it looked like my mouth is full. That's enough for culpability in Yom Kippur. So basically a half a mouthful. The Gemara asks, but we learned, the language in the Mishnah is male lugmov, a full cheek. So why are you saying only half? It's got to be the whole mouth. And therefore you must say, not actually male lugmov, but kim male lugmov, Rather, we must say that the Mishnah means it is like a full cheek, meaning it looks like your mouth is full, not that it's actually full. Look like it's actually full. Looking like it's full only requires half your mouth. Actually full requires your full mouth. And because we're saying kimmel lugmav, like, or looks like your mouth is full, thus it means only half the mouth. And this is the halacha. But now we're going to be introduced to other opinions, which is going to cast doubt on this opinion here. So basically, we raise the following challenge. Again, when the Gemoro introduces the word meseh, it means we're raising a challenge from a text greater than yourself. So the one speaking here is Rabbi Yehuda, the name of Shmuel, who says the Mishnah does not mean a full mouth, but only a half a mouth. And Rabbi Yehuda, the name of Shmuel, is a scholar of the Gemara age, and the text we're about to quote is a Mishnaic age text, which implies differently. Namely, the Mishnaic age text reads, Kama yishta, how much does one need to drink on Yom Kippur? And they'll be culpable. Again, it's forbidden to drink any amount. But for culpability, the Gemara is asking, what's the minimum amount for culpability? The Gemara now brings 4 opinions. Opinion number 1, Beishamai says, universal standard, revius. A revius, which is the standard size of drinking on, just drinking in general. Like when you drink for Kiddush, you have to drink a revius. When you drink the 4 cups of wine at the Seder, you got to drink a revius. It's something like 3 ounces. Somewhere around there. So Beishamai says a universal standard, a revius. Beis Hillel says, mole lugmav, to fill your entire mouth. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Mishum Rabbi Lezer. Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Rabbi Lezer, Kim mole lugmav, not the entirety of your mouth, but like the entirety of your mouth. And Rabbi Yehuda says, Kibdei Gemia, the amount that you can swallow in one gulp. So 4 opinions. 1 is universal standard, Beishamai, revius. Beis Hillel, full cheek or full mouth. Rabbi Lezer, like a full mouth. And Rabbi Yehuda, son of Beseda, like the amount that you can gulp down in one go. So, yes, we refer to it as cheeks because I'm told you the conclusion. But if you look at the language itself, it's the entirety of your cheeks, plural, which is your full mouth. But then if you say it should look like your mouth is full, then it's only half the side. Right? But now what's interesting here is that the Gemara here, that this text splits these 2 opinions. In other words, in our Mishnah, all it says is mole lugmav, a full mouth. And we interpret it to mean only half. Whereas over here, it's clearly 2 different opinions. One that says full mouth, Beis Hillel, and one that's Rebbe Lezer, which says like a full mouth. Which then casts doubt on what our Mishnah means. And here's how the Gemara goes through that. Mia difa MEASSURES. When Beis Hillel says a full mouth, is that more than our Mishnah? The ukma kadesh yira, which you have decided doesn't mean an actual full mouth. You, Rabbi Yehuda, in the name of Shmuel, decided doesn't mean an actual full mouth, but only means like it looks like a full mouth, only half your mouth. They're using Beis Hillel and our Mishnah use the exact same language. They both say the words mole lugmav, and yet here you, Rabbi Yehuda, in the name of Shmuel, said that doesn't mean a full mouth. It means only that it looks like a full mouth, which is half your mouth. And yet here, Beis Hillel says full mouth. Are you saying that they're the same thing? Says the Gemara, yes, it is the same thing. Beis Hillel also doesn't mean a full mouth. He only means a half a mouth. But if that's the case, Hein Rebbe Lezer, then that's the exact same thing as Rebbe Lezer. As I mentioned before, this Mishnaic text, not the Mishnaic itself, but the Mishnaic age text, the Brisa, separates 2 opinions. One that says full mouth and one that says like full mouth. So if you're telling me that whenever the text says full mouth, it only means half, then that's the exact same thing as Rebbe Lezer, who himself says only like a full mouth. Following? But the Mishnaic age text splits them into 2. They're only in agreement because of the way you interpreted one of the texts. Nobody has to show them. But don't interpret it that way and leave it at disagreement. Don't put your interpretation in and then ruin the discussion. That's the Gemara is challenging. It's not consistent with the way the Mishnah looks at it. Says the Gemara like this. No. There's a distinction. Mole lugmav doichik. Which means like this. Whenever the Mishnaic age text says mole lugmav, a full mouth, it actually doesn't mean a full mouth. It means that it shall look like a full mouth. Then when Rebbe Lezer said kim mole lugmav, like a full mouth, he didn't mean that it looks like a full mouth. He means that you almost filled up your mouth. Which means then there are actually 5 different ways. So there are 5 different sizes that we can say for violation, for the amount of water the liquid required to drink for violation. Let's just do the easy ones. Beis Shammai says universal standard, revius. Rebbe Levi say that the last one said the amount you gulp down. Rebbe Lezer says like a full mouth, meaning your mouth is almost full. Now there is the actual full mouth, but then there's the full mouth as we thought it meant, which means literally a full mouth. But then that's not, so that one's off the chart. But really, what it means is half a mouth, which means only 4 views, but there was like a 5th one we almost thought was right. Depends how big your mouth is. And that's a good question, which the Gemoro is going to get to right next, which God willing will get to tomorrow, actually. Exactly what this means. Is Beis Shammai being more lenient? Or is he being more stringent? Depends, because he only said he'd give a universal standard. Is he smaller than the half a cheek or bigger than the half a cheek? And that would change. Is he lenient or is he more stringent? And that's a problem. Who cares? Let him be even stringent, or because we have a rule. Beis Shammai is always more stringent, with the exception of 3 cases. So any other disputes, aside for those 3 cases which mentioned elsewhere in the Mishnah, in the Gemara, must be Beis Shammai more stringent. And that's what we're going to get to, God willing, tomorrow. A wonderful day.